He already swung his huge wooden hammer. A lump rose in my throat, but then Alex took a step forward and covered me with himself. "No, you don't have to." A second later, I heard a piercing scream. "Hey Paula, I dare you to hit on that guy who wanted to meet you so much." I suddenly heard from my friend in a tarantula costume. Today was the Halloween ball at her school. And today was also my 18th birthday. Hooray! I was finally all grown up. Everyone congratulated me today, even the kids from the lower grades. But this new Alex, he just looked like he was about 12 years old and he transferred to her school just a couple of weeks ago. Alex looked very shy, but almost every day he tried to start a conversation with me. I used to ignore him, but I went straight to him. I could hit on a 12-year-old boy. I wanted to show off in front of my friends. I went up to the kid. He was in a soldier costume from the Squid Game and started making eyes at him. You should have seen how he perked up. My friends, meanwhile, were watching the whole scene and giggling, but suddenly the slow dance started playing. I was confused for a second, but I quickly pulled myself together. "Well, kid, you're in trouble." I invited Alex to dance. He seemed to be just glowing with happiness. I thought he would be more uptight, but at some point, he even put his head on my shoulder. Wow, new guy. While we were dancing, I decided to ask him more about everything, because I didn't really know anything, and suddenly it turned out that Alex was also adopted. Well, few people at school knew that I was adopted when I was about 6. My friends seemed to have noticed this hitch. I immediately remembered our deal again. "Let's go to the closet," I told Alex. "We'll dance there." Alex seemed a little tense but agreed. We calmly walked into the closet right in front of my classmates' noses, and I was just elated. Yes, I can hit on anyone at this party. They thought I'd back out of a promise. In the closet, Alex and I continued to dance, but his mood changed noticeably. He kept looking into my eyes but immediately looked away. "Is something wrong?" I asked with a smile. I thought he was worried about dancing with the older girl. But what he said next just didn't fit in my head. "Be my guardian. You're already 18. Alex suddenly blurted out. "What?" He quickly mumbled that there was no time to explain. I was in shock. Did the boy lost his marbles? I didn't know what to say to that. But suddenly the music in the main hall stopped abruptly. We heard some noise and ran to see what was going on there. There was a commotion in the assembly hall. Suddenly I saw the police. For a second, it seemed to me that they were just guys from the parallel form in Halloween costumes. But no, they were real cops. Alex nervously moved away somewhere to the side. I didn't understand anything. I watched the cops approach and the other students and show them Alex's picture. They said that the boy had recently disappeared from the orphanage, and now they were investigating the case. Wasn't this some kind of prank? I heard children from Alex's class whispering that Alex was allegedly being stalked by his crazy father. He wanted to regain his parental rights. No, this was too much. Where's this boy? I need to ask him a lot of things. I rushed in the direction Alex had gone, but then the lights went out all over the hall. The commotion only intensified. In the dark, I kept bumping into other students. Someone even started screaming. Yeah, a real Halloween ball. I don't think. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw policemen with flashlights approaching all the guys in costumes from the Squid Game. I stopped and watched with a sinking heart as one of the cops took off the mask from Alex? But there was another boy under it. I breathed a sigh of relief. But where was Alex? I tried to find him, but in vain. He was probably already somewhere far away. After 15 minutes, the police asked everyone to leave the room. Standing in the terrible crush at the exit, I couldn't stop thinking about one thing. Why did Alex want me to become his guardian? This thought did not leave me all the way home. I was already approaching my yard when I suddenly heard someone quickly catching up with me. Fragments of phrases about the crazy father immediately appeared in my head. A lump rose in my throat. "Hey, Paula," I suddenly heard a friendly voice. I turned around and saw Alex. "Where have you been?" "I've been looking for you all evening." Alex hesitated for a moment. "Were you really looking for me?" he suddenly asked. I nodded impatiently. "I need to tell you something." Alex looked me straight in the eye. It was obvious that it was difficult for him to cope with excitement. For a second, it seemed to me that he would now confess his love to me. But Alex said something much more shocking. "Actually, we are siblings." I had spent all my money on a bribe in an orphanage to find out. I couldn't believe my ears. Yes, I knew for a long time that I was adopted. But was this boy my own brother? It just didn't fit in my head. But I immediately caught myself thinking that we even looked alike. Alex meanwhile continued. He told me that a month ago, his foster mother died and bequeathed him a good inheritance. But his crazy father found out about it. Our crazy father, to be precise. Alex corrected himself. Meanwhile, I couldn't believe that all this was happening for real. As soon as the father found out about the large inheritance, he immediately decided to restore his parental rights in order to get it. At first, his attempts were quite innocent. He came to Alex in the orphanage and even brought some gifts. But Alex didn't fall for it. And then this madman finally went crazy. He decided to forcibly return his parental rights by all means. Alex was forced to flee from the orphanage, but his father found him and was now following him. I wanted you to become my guardian, because I have no one else left at all. Alex looked away. I didn't know what to say to him. I was all over the place. But why didn't you say right away? That was all I could barely bring myself to say. Of course, I wouldn't leave my brother in trouble, but I didn't have time to finish the sentence. Suddenly, a silhouette jumped out at us from behind the bushes near my house with a wild scream. "Scum!" he yelled. "Dad!" Alex only whispered in confusion in response. But this creature didn't look much like a human. The psychopath had madly rolling red bloodshot eyes, and he had in his hands a huge wooden hammer. It was immediately clear that nothing would stop him on the way to his goal. My legs began to tremble. "Alex, run!" I just shouted, but immediately turned around and stopped. There was nowhere to run, a dead end. I looked at Alex in confusion. Yeah, that's not how I imagined meeting my biological father. Meanwhile, he was approaching with a nasty grin and constantly muttering that Alex would not walk away now and would become his son again. "Come to Daddy," he shouted to Alex. "And I'll deal with you now." The madman looked in my direction. My vision went dark. "Alex, I think I'm blacking out." My brother looked at me for a second and then took a step forward and covered me with himself. "Alex, don't!" The psychopathic father already swung his huge hammer. I squeezed my eyes shut. Suddenly I heard a piercing scream, but it wasn't Alex who shouted, but our father. I opened my eyes and saw several cops grabbing this madman at once. I was completely confused and couldn't stop shaking. I only hesitantly put my arm around Alex's shoulders. Then one of the policemen came up to us. It turned out that the cops had been following us after school because they immediately noticed something was wrong. But they could not detain the father immediately. They had to wait until he attacked so that the court would have irrefutable evidence of his guilt. The policeman apologized for the fact that we had to go through all this. Now our father was no longer a threat to anyone. When our crazy father was taken away, Alex looked at me and muttered, "Thank you. Thank you for that," I whispered back. It took me a while to come to my senses after the events of that day, and often saw a hand with a huge wooden hammer in nightmares. But soon, everything got better. One sunny Saturday morning as usual, I went down to the kitchen to have breakfast. "Mom, Dad, good morning." I greeted as usual. Yes, I know they are adoptive, but they are the best parents in the whole world. At least because, after all this, they adopted Alex too. "Good morning to you too, little brother," I said cheerfully to him. Of course, all this was very difficult, but I am glad of this turn of fate because, thanks to him, I got not only the coolest and bravest brother, but also a couple of $1 million, which Alex offered to share equally in a brotherly way. Whatever you say, little brother. Did you like the video? Subscribe and like it. Support the channel. Thank you. I burst into my brother's room and blurted out, "Charlie, you're gonna be my boyfriend." He said I was crazy. We were brothers and sisters, but I immediately calmed him down. And I told him that all 11 years at school, I was considered a loser, but it was the last years of my studies, and I decided to prove that I was a cool girl and to win the love of the best guy in school, Dan. How many times have I tried to get Dan's attention? But all my attempts have failed. Everyone just laughed at me and said that Dan wouldn't fall for a nerd. And yesterday, I thought I saw Dan wink at me at school in the locker room. I realized here it was, my chance to change everything. But after hearing me out, my brother Charlie flatly refused to play my boyfriend. Oh, right? Then I said that if he did not help, I would tell our parents that I saw him doing something forbidden with the guys at the party. Charlie panicked and said he was just messing around. And I replied that if our parents found out, they would probably send him to a clinic for treatment. Then he would not have a sports career. He added that he did not expect such a vile blackmail from me. After that, Charlie sighed and asked what to do. The plan was this: I would catch Pretty Dan after school, and when we left school, Charlie would treat me with a bouquet. Dan would get jealous and finally fall in love with me, a trick I read about from a pickup coach. We don't look like brothers and sisters. You are a blue-eyed blonde, and I am a brunette with brown eyes. Charlie nodded curtly. After school, everything went as it should. I found Dan, and when we left school, Charlie was waiting for me with a gorgeous bouquet. I hugged my brother, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw how much Dan didn't like it. He was definitely jealous. It worked. Suddenly, a blonde girl came up to us, and Dan quickly left with her. What was that just now? Was she his girlfriend? I immediately told Charlie to follow them. Charlie said that he didn't like the guy and that he would go after him, just so I wouldn't be in any danger. Come on, you don't know him at all. We watched Dan and his blonde girl carefully, and at one point, they went into the park. The path gradually narrowed. We had to fall far behind to avoid being noticed. And Charlie was always stopping and showing me some leaves. After another leaf, I suddenly realized that I didn't see Dan. Damn, did we miss them? It's all because of you, Charlie. I was frantically trying to figure out how to find them when I suddenly saw a Ferris wheel nearby. Bingo! From this height, we'll find Dan quickly. The queue for the wheel was long and I was nervous. Charlie tried to calm me down and even brought me cotton candy. How did he know I loved it? Then it was our turn, and the controller offered to take binoculars. Of course, give me. It will be very useful. We started going up, and I looked through the binoculars for Dan, and Charlie kept saying it was a stupid idea. And then I finally saw Dan on one of the benches. He was having a nice chat with a blonde. We just need to go down there and eavesdrop on their conversation, but the wheel was moving so slowly. Suddenly, we rocked, and for a second, Charlie and I were so close that our lips almost touched. And for the first time, I saw his deep blue eyes so close. Wow. But I immediately pulled away from him. There was an awkward silence in the air. When we finally got down, I noticed that Charlie looked sad. I pretended that nothing had happened and said that we needed to get to Dan faster. I hoped he was still sitting on that bench. We made our way to them and crouched in the bushes behind them, where we could hear the conversation clearly. At first, they were talking about all sorts of nonsense, but suddenly my name was mentioned in the conversation. I was glad that Dan was thinking of me. But he only laughed at this masquerade with flowers. He didn't believe Charlie was my boyfriend. I was annoyed that my plan had failed. And then Charlie began to pull me aside. Charlie, what's this for? Looking down, I noticed a snake near my leg. Charlie caught himself and threw it back with a branch, but Dan had already got up from the bench and was walking towards the bushes. He heard my cry. Charlie suddenly howled like a huge dog. Dan immediately recoiled, and he and the blonde hurried away. Thank you, Charlie. As soon as we got home, I locked myself in my room and spent half the night coming up with a new plan. But I kept thinking about the moment on the wheel. I couldn't think of anything but Charlie's deep blue eyes. We almost kissed. And then I got an idea. We could kiss in front of Dan. A fake kiss, of course. I went out to breakfast and, as if nothing had happened, told Charlie about it. He almost choked and refused to participate. But I immediately reminded him that there was something I could tell our parents. Charlie and I arrived at school earlier and were standing in the school parking lot on purpose. I was worried and kept looking over my shoulder to make sure I didn't miss Dan. And now, at last, he arrived. I wrapped my arms around Charlie's neck and wanted to turn my back on Dan so he wouldn't notice our fake kiss. But Charlie suddenly kissed me for real. Charlie, what are you doing? I tried to pull away, and then I noticed over my shoulder that Dan was walking toward me. Ignoring Charlie and her kiss, Dan took my hand and invited me to the party. Oh my god! Did it really work? And then Charlie suddenly said that I wasn't going anywhere. No, I said. I'm coming to this party! Then Dan and Charlie exchanged an unfriendly look, after which Dan nodded and left. I immediately snapped at Charlie. What are you doing? Why did you really kiss me? Charlie deadpanned that he just wanted to help. Then make things realistic. Then I thanked Charlie coldly and told him that his help was no longer needed. I turned around and went home. The party was already today, and I needed a cool look. As I picked up my dresses, I banished the thought that my first kiss in life had happened to my brother. And then Charlie came into the room. He was about to say something, but when he saw me, he stopped in mid-sentence, and then he said with a delight that I was stunning. I felt myself blush, turned away, and firmly stated that I was in a hurry, and quickly left. I was looking forward to a great evening with Dan, but he immediately disappeared somewhere, and I was left alone. Everyone was having fun, and I was very lonely. I thought Charlie would support me now, but I stopped myself. At that moment, Dan came up and said that he had a surprise. Before I could answer, Dan pulled me along. Everyone parted, and then I was standing in the center of the room. Dan asked me to close my eyes, and suddenly something nasty was poured on my head. I looked up and there was a bucket of slop hanging from the ceiling. Everyone burst out laughing. Dan, why are you doing this? At that moment, he threw a glass of juice at me and said that no one liked such crazy nerds, much less him. Then Dan added that I was trying to make him jealous by kissing my brother. He was onto us from the start. Boo! The cheerleaders immediately boomed. You're just a jerk and she's the best girl on earth. I heard a familiar voice. Charlie? But what was he doing here? Charlie said quietly that he didn't like Dan right away. He was worried and decided to check on me. I pushed everyone aside and ran out into the street, with Charlie running after me. I was choking on tears. I embarrassed myself in front of the whole school. Charlie tried to calm me down and told me that Dan wasn't just worthy of me. Through my tears, I asked, and who is worthy then? And then Charlie came right up to me and told me that he had been in love with me since childhood and no longer wanted to hide his feelings. That's why he took up sports, to try to drown out his feelings. It helped for a long time, but the incident on the Ferris wheel reminded him of everything. I couldn't believe it. Charlie, are you sick? You're my brother. I staggered away from him and ran away. My mind was all mixed up. He was my brother. We needed to stay away from each other. I didn't want to see Charlie, and I didn't want to be around him. And then I remembered about something forbidden. I ran home. My parents were shocked by my appearance and began to ask what happened. But I blurted out everything to Dad about the party where Charlie was using some illicit drug. I said that he needed urgent treatment and that they should take him to the clinic. Dad was furious, and at that moment, Charlie ran home, out of breath. Dad told me to go to my room and ordered Charlie to sit down at the table. I was hurt and ashamed. It seemed like I'd made a terrible mistake. I couldn't sleep all night. One minute, I wanted to go into Charlie's room and hug him. The next, I wanted him out of my life. The next morning, I woke up to a loud slam of the door. I ran to the window. Charlie was walking to the bus stop with his bag. I looked at him for the last time, and suddenly something inside me seemed to shrink. These feelings are terrible, but I can't lose him. I rushed down to my parents and blurted out that Charlie and I were in love. There was a pause. I thought they would begin to say that I was crazy and also lock me up in some kind of an asylum. But Dad didn't just say anything. And then suddenly, he hugged me and said that he and my mom had guessed that this could happen. What are you talking about? And then Dad said that they didn't want to talk about it, but it looked like it was time now. My parents adopted me when I was a year old. It turned out that Charlie knew everything, but they asked him not to tell me about it. I was shocked. It turned out that all this time, Charlie was not my brother. But then it dawned on me that this meant that Charlie and I could be together after all. Hooray! I immediately ran out of the house. My parents shouted after me that I would not make it. The bus was about to leave, but I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was happy. While I was chasing that vile Dan, my true love was so close. A bus stop was around the corner, and I saw Charlie on the bus. I started to scream, and then Charlie noticed me. He ran out of the bus as fast as he could, and I immediately threw my arms around his neck. We're not siblings. I know, he didn't want to tell you, so as not to hurt you. Charlie gave me a big hug, but the bus gave the signal to leave. Charlie opened his arms. Please don't go away. After all, now we will be together. Despite my tears, Charlie got on the bus. I was amazed. Why was he leaving? But Charlie took his bag from the salon and calmly walked back to me. Actually, I was on my way to the workout, but if this is the case, I can skip one. How? I thought you were going to the clinic. Charlie laughed and said that he settled everything with his father. He gently took my hand and suggested that we take a walk in the park. And I said I wouldn't mind another ride on the Ferris wheel.